Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Facebook live broadcast. I'm Steve Altishan, Director of Client Partnerships here at Pacific Cascade Legal. And today I'm here with Kids Mindfulness Coach, Lindsay Miller, to talk about giving kids the power to verbalize their feelings through a divorce to prevent false internal narratives. Well, that's a mouthful. We're going to talk about all of that. But before that, Lindsay, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you kind of got to being in the position you're being and this sort of information you're giving out and help?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks for having me, Steve. I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Me too.
So, in my early adulthood, I navigated some tough moments. My husband and I had navigated infertility, which led to some marital struggles. There were a lot of things going on that were really, really tough during that time. I didn't have the words to verbalize it. I didn't have the tools to manage the emotions. I didn't have what I needed in order to make it through that season of life with a level of resilience that I wanted to cultivate. So I started looking for the tools. I looked for the help. I looked for the people. I looked for all the different ways that I could, kind of shore myself up during a season that just really asked a lot of me. And as I went through that process, I was like, I want to help other people in this way. So I went to graduate school, had intended on getting a degree in marriage and family therapy. As I got into it, I started recognizing that some of the ways that we in therapy help people weren't the ways I wanted to particularly help people, which was an interesting realization for me. So I took a little side detour into coaching because I wanted to create a scenario where I could support kids, particularly by teaching them these skills and tools in a way that didn't have a power differential. I didn't want to be coming across as like the one who knows everything and then have there be a child there who was just really vulnerable and needing information and tools but didn't feel empowered themselves. And I'm not saying all therapists are like that, but I am saying the tenor and like the feel of the program that I was in was asking me to present myself in that way. And so I took the coaching route. I got myself certified as a mindfulness teacher. I did a coaching certification and then I blended the two with my child development undergraduate degree. And I created a format, a method for helping kids manage big feelings, cultivate resilience when it comes to stress, and then build thoughts and emotional regulation tools in a way that gives them empowerment. It gives them the ability to talk about what they're feeling, to know how to manage their thoughts, and to create the outcomes that they're looking for. So for kids who are struggling with confidence, we talk about how to manage those feelings and build confidence. Kids that are struggling with feeling less than in terms of like their schoolwork or athletic activities. We work on, finding ways for them to manage the nervousness before a game and perform optimally. So I created this method of helping people as a way to empower kids with the kind of tools we're going to talk about today, because I feel like building a life from that place sets them up for being able to manage the stresses that are going to inevitably come, right, throughout life. And as an adult, I didn't have those tools and I really wish that I had. So I'm excited to be able to be teaching them to kids so that they can build a life from that foundation of emotional awareness and self-regulation, self-awareness.
I love it. I love that. I mean, this is, you know, it's not even a niche. That's not fair to call it. It's a spot that you just don't see a lot of in the way you're doing it. And that's why I just love this. So I'm going to go back, and ask my dummies 101 question on this, which
Yeah.
was, let's just start with what sort of is the basic definition you use and for mindfulness, because you can hear that word a lot and
Yeah.
it's used sometimes differently.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think is important to note is that a lot of people think of mindfulness as sitting and meditating, right? Or just being still
Yeah.
and breathing. And mindfulness is actually the way you live when you do those things. You live mindfully, right? You live with awareness. So I define mindfulness as what's going on inside of you, what's going on outside of you, and then having the ability to make a choice on purpose. So when we take our emotions, what's going on inside of us, our physical state, like, am I tired today? We take our mental state, like, are my thoughts racing right now? Is my mind pretty calm? When we can notice all of those things and then notice, okay, what's going outside of me? For kids, that might be I'm taking a test right now, or I'm about to play my soccer game, or my mom and dad are having a conversation that feels like uncomfortable to me, right? Like those are all things going on outside of us. And then we can make a choice on purpose. We can integrate all of that understanding and then choose what to do with it instead of just being really reactive. So, mindfulness is the process of like integrating those different pieces of awareness in a way that moves you forward skillfully.
How does that kind of work with small children or with kids? Um, I love something you had sent me about when you're talking about kids using simple stories to kind of start getting their brain in that situation. Can you kind of expand on that? Because that was fascinating.
Yeah. So there's actually a part of our brain that does this. There's a part of our brain that kind of monitors how we're doing physically, how we're doing emotionally, and how we're doing mentally. We can practice using that part of our brain no matter what age we are, right? As an adult, I can tell you about the name of that part of the brain, what it does, and all those things, and you can understand, right? But for kids, we kind of need to use a little bit different language to help them connect with the idea that there's a part of their brain that kind of monitors. So I like to use stories to help kids just start to understand the idea of metacognition or like thinking about thinking. So when we are thinking about how we're feeling and we're thinking about thinking, we're using a specific part of our brain. So the stories that I use with kids invite them to access that part of their brain and build the connections that they'll need to use that part of their brain quickly and in other situations. So one of the examples that I use is the example of a chocolate factory. So I love a good chocolate factory. Do you, Steve?
I love it.
So I go in, if you've ever toured a chocolate factory or any factory for that matter, you know that there's kind of like this catwalk, right? Where you walk along and there's these big windows and then you can see the different areas. So there's this one chocolate factory in Ohio where they make Buckeyes, and you've got like the people who are just initially melting the chocolate and then the people who are like mixing the, stuff for the filling. And then you have the people who are running the machine where they're actually like putting it in the mold. And then you have the people that are packaging it. And then you have the people that are boxing it, right? So you have all these different stations with different machines. So our brains are kind of like that. If you think about that catwalk or that walkway with all the windows at the chocolate factory, that's the part of our brain that monitors. There's a part of our brain where it's just kind of keeping in tabs on what's going on, how we're doing. And then there are the individual parts of our brain that are like working on the emotions, like managing our thoughts. There are the parts of our brain that are like keeping our heart beating, our nervous system response, all those things. So when we can connect with kids and help them understand, like, let's use the part of your brain that's like the zoom out part of your brain, the part of your brain that's on that walkway, looking at all the windows and seeing, like, how are my emotions doing right now? How are my thoughts doing right now? How's my body feeling right now? And then also be able to tune into each of the individual tasks, like knowing, okay, my emotions, I'm feeling really angry or frustrated, or my like physical body, I'm feeling really tired because I didn't get good sleep last night, or I'm feeling really energized because I am ready to play my game. When we can help kids zoom in and zoom out, like do the individual awareness and then zoom out and piece it all together, those are the kind of like aha moments that they can have when they're able to integrate that knowledge. And so I like using those kinds of stories. We'll talk about thought rivers. So there's the idea that like you have a river of thoughts going through your head. So this would be specifically when they're managing their thoughts. There's a river of thoughts, and you can choose which ones you want to take out and choose which ones to let go. So when we can use those types of different stories to help them understand these more abstract concepts, we give them the ability to bring awareness into any moment that they're in a skillful, fun, and effective way.
Wow. We are in large part, although not all, a family law firm, a lot of divorces, and that river for kids, a lot of times is like just a running, crashing flood.
Yeah.
And it sounds like this can kind of help with the stress that they have to sort of try to figure it out.
Yeah, totally. And we can loop in emotions there too, right? But like, yeah, if you've got a kiddo who's navigating parents who are going through a divorce and they're navigating, their experiences with each parent, their own experience, like the uncertainty that comes, right? All of those things are a normal part of divorce. But when you're looking at it from the child's perspective, it just feels like a lot, right? Like you said, the overwhelm that you can have. And so what we can do with kids is help them notice, like, okay, all these things are in your thought river. I have kids make a thought river. So you can just have a kiddo draw a thought river and ask them to put in, like, what are all the thoughts that they're having right now, about what's going on? What are they worried about? What are the things that they're experiencing? And as parents, this is tricky, right? Because we have to have a level of self awareness that allows us to sit with our child in some uncomfortable emotions. But when we can give them those tools and sit with them with a level of compassion and acceptance, like whatever they're telling us, it's not necessarily about us. It's just their experience. So we can have that level of neutrality. We give them the opportunity to really notice, like, I'm feeling really stressed because I don't know where I'm going to be next week. Like, okay, do we just need to get a big calendar that has a few more months on it so we can map out, what you need? Or I'm feeling really worried because, I'm not sure if something is my fault in this situation, or I'm not sure, and a lot of times as parents, we don't know what's going through their heads, right? Like we don't know all of their thoughts, but when we can help them start to articulate the thoughts, we're like, okay, that's a thought that's in your river. You and I have talked about how this isn't your fault, right? Like you didn't do anything wrong. So when kids are left to kind of create their own narrative about something, all those thoughts, like they just accept them as true, right? And they're like pulling all the
Yep.
thoughts out of the river and they're just like, this must be true, this must be true, this must be true. And when we can work with them to create this thought river, and like maybe that's when you could let go down your thought river. And the thing about the thought river too is that you're going to have thoughts that resurface, right? They're going to come again and again and again. And so we just get used to letting them go. And that's something that becomes a practice that's really, really powerful.
Wow. I love that. It just feels like, what you're talking about can't not help kids through a divorce and kind of getting to the other side because the stress doesn't end when the divorce ends. They need these skills afterwards.
Yeah.
And so you also talked about, I read, and it was great. It was how to validate kids' feelings without taking them personally. Well, personally, I can tell you, I've talked when I was talking with my kids about their feelings. It rarely went very well. So I'm not sure where I went wrong, but can you talk about that? Because that those two things don't necessarily go together.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great point. And it's a skill we all have to practice, right? And I think one of the things that's so important about a mindful perspective is the idea of self-compassion. And so wherever we're at in our journey with this, like first and foremost, having compassion for ourselves and any places we may have fallen short, or we may, have gotten irritated with our kids or anything like that, shortcomings we may see in ourselves. That's something that the more we're gentle with ourselves, the more gentle we can be with our kids. So that's like a really common thread through a mindfulness practice. But in this particular example, I think what's really helpful is the idea of a bench. So this is Becky Kennedy. The idea of like each emotion as a bench. And it's just like imagine this big park with a lot of benches. And when your child is experiencing a certain emotion, they're learning to sit on that bench. They're like acquainting themselves with that part of the park. And when we are in a position that they want to talk to us about how they're feeling, what they're doing is inviting us to sit on the bench with them. They're not saying, I can't believe you made me sit on this bench. They're not saying you're the reason I have to sit on this bench. And maybe they do say that sometimes. But if we can conceptualize their communication to us as an invitation to just sit with them on this bench and be with them, it takes a lot of the sting out, right? Like it takes a lot of the like things we could take personally and makes them neutral. So the idea of like your child being angry, like, okay, I'm angry right now, like that's their invitation for you to sit on the anger bench with them. Can you sit on it with them? Can you just hold space for their anger? Can you hold space for their uncertainty? And again, that's a practice we cultivate as parents. But like when we can do that, they invite us to sit on more and more benches because they're like, oh, my anger is not scary to you. My uncertainty, it doesn't scare you. But if we don't sit on the bench with them, then we leave them to believe that like what they're feeling is so scary and so hard that like we can't even tolerate it. And that's where it gets tricky because when we leave them to create their own narrative around it and we leave them to feel like what they're feeling is like so big and scary that we can't even go there with them,
Right.
they're isolated and they just don't have what they need to make it through with the level of resilience that we want them to.
I love that. I love the bench thing. It's like I'm sitting on the bench with you, so I can actually see what you're saying, rather than sitting on the bench on the other side of the park where I don't even see what you're saying, so I don't understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
I I really like that a lot. What what are ways to help them see us as parents growing and learning and trying to understand them?
Yeah, that's such a good question. Because I think a lot of the parents who are intimidated about the idea of mindfulness is they're like, I don't have practice with this. I haven't learned it myself. I can't teach my kid. And for those parents, I am always very compassionate, right? And I'm always happy to teach anybody's child mindfulness. I think it's an amazing tool, and there's a lot of fun ways to teach it. And at the same time, your practice and like your missteps and your mistakes, those are going to be the things that teach your child on a day to day basis, more than me sitting with them for 30 minutes, right? Like it's being able to witness the growth of the parent that teaches so much. And so I think for kids it's such a gift if we can authentically show up and be learning and kind of processing alongside them. One of the parents that I work with, I was talking with her the other day and we were talking about the idea of a redo. And in our house we have a lot of redos. So we might have an interaction that doesn't go so well. And because I'm mindful that I'm like thinking about it and I'm noticing, I don't feel like that was the way I wanted to show up in that moment. I feel uncomfortable with how we left that. And then I'm noticing my child's response. Maybe she's like not okay with it either. And so I'm going to make a choice on purpose and say, like, hey, could we do that over again? Could I get a redo on that? What I actually wanted to say or what I wish I had said was this. Right. And so those kind of moments are so powerful for kids because, again, like I mentioned at the beginning, they see us as parents a lot of times until they maybe get to be teenagers as all knowing, right? Or that we should just have the answers or know the thing. And we feel that pressure and weight as parents. So when we can open up a dialogue where we can still be like, hey, I'm in control of this situation, right? Like we want them to feel like we've got them and that it's going to be okay, that a level of certainty they can count on, in the midst of whatever uncertainty we're in the middle of. But if we can then say, and I didn't do that quite right. It just is so powerful for them because it lets them, it gives them permission to make mistakes. And then B, it also offers them the opportunity to give you feedback about how an interaction went. And so they feel that open communication start to flourish when we're okay to make a mistake in front of them.
I love that. Is just sort of an off question, and I didn't ask this. Is this something that you do in tandem with adults and their kids, or just with the kids and just with adults, or both, or how does
Yeah.
that work just physically?
Yeah, it's such a great question. So, one of the things that I didn't necessarily love about the therapeutic model when I was studying that was the disconnect between the parent and the child. Like the child might be learning a skill, the parent's not learning the skill, but at the end of the day, the child's going home to the parent's house, and then there's just like a disconnect, right, between what's going on. Um, and so one of the things that I do with my method is I have the tools that I teach the child, and then I update the parent each week. And I talk them through the tool. I give them one or two applications for how to use the tool during the week. And then a lot of times they're maybe in the background where I'm talking to the child on Zoom. So they're overhearing it. So I reinforce it with the parent a couple of times and give them ways to apply it or practice it, very simple ways. And then they can take that throughout their week. So I'm teaching both of them just using different modalities. Like I'm using the written word, or I'll send a video or, some sort of tutorial for the parent. And then I'm interacting directly with the child
Wow,
on Zoom.
this all sounds really good. Okay, you've talked about it when we were talking about things to talk about. is helping kids develop emotional intelligence. And it's not a phrase you hear a lot. But when you kind of think about it, it's kind of a great concept. Can we kind of talk about that a little?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's something that's coming into vogue more in, the last decade or so because we're seeing is that kids with emotional intelligence, like their grades, they tend to have grades that are higher. They tend to be getting, jobs that are solid. They're successful in the workplace because they can interact with people and manage their emotions. They can name their emotions and manage them. And so when we have little kids, especially in situations that are really challenging, we have a big opportunity to teach them how to name what they're feeling. So when we're talking about divorce, we're talking about, fear. We might be talking about anger, uncertainty. We're talking about maybe like distraction. There's like all this stuff kind of going on and they've still got to go to school and they've still got to, be on the soccer team. And so when we can help them name those things, again, that's just sitting on the bench with them, we give them the opportunity to have a felt experience of what that emotion is. And just like with language, we want to expose kids to as many words as possible, right, when they're little, so that they're familiar to them. It's the same with emotion. We want to give kids access to as many of those benches as possible so they're familiar with them and they know that view of the park. Because when they know about themselves, like, yeah, when I am feeling distressed or uncertain, I know that it helps me to finish the story. Like I know that if I'm feeling like anxious about something and I don't know how it's going to turn out, as in, the case of divorce, that it will help me to talk myself through to the end of the story. And they can say, okay, I'm not sure exactly what the custody will look like and if I'll be with mom or dad the first half of the week or every other week or whatever. But I do know that I have two parents who love me and they will figure it out. I also know that I'll be at the same school or I'll have the same friends or I'll, like we walk them through all the way to the end of that discomfort or anxiety, but we can do that with all emotions. And there's a really great app that I recommend for any families called the How We Feel app. It's from research out of Yale. Mark Brackett's team put together this incredible app. It's free. It has all these different emotion bubbles, different shapes, and you identify, you just do a check in once or twice a day, how you're feeling. And just having the words to articulate, instead of saying, I feel bad, if you can say, I feel uncertain, you're going to be able to address that totally differently, right? Than I feel bad. So, especially in the case of divorce, where the range of emotions is so broad, giving them opportunity to access, it's going to create an emotionally intelligent child.
It feels like you're allowing kids to develop perspective early in life. And that's I mean, that's one of the things that as an old, you know, person, it takes a while to be able to really develop perspective in a lot of cases. But this is what you're starting to do at a young age.
Yeah. And like, going back to our original example of the catwalk there at the chocolate factory, right? There are some experiences that kids get invited to really early. And maybe it's not what you planned for them, or maybe it's not what you wanted. But like I know in my own life, when I got invited to experiences that I wasn't really interested in having, that like being able to grow from those experiences created a sense of meaning for me, right? Like when I navigated infertility, when I navigated loss, when I navigated marital struggles, like those things, I chose to look at them through this lens of like, what can I learn? How can I grow in this situation? And I'm not saying we need to get moral about it, but I'm just saying I believe strongly in beauty for ashes just because I've lived that, right? There's so
Yeah.
many times that my life looked like a pile of ashes and there was something beautiful that I could help create from it. And I think in this instance, for kids especially, we can say, this might be a really tough experience you're going through for sure, 100%. Not something I would wish for you, not something I wanted for you. And also, there are so many skills that you're going to come away with as a result of this that are going to impact you for the rest of your life. Right. And when we can create a kind of meaningful experience around that for ourselves and our connection with our kids, we're going to approach those interactions totally differently.
Oh, yeah. One of the skills that just jumped to mind when you said that is the skill of not becoming, not having avoidance. It's so easy, and it seems like once you start, it's tough to get rid of just trying to avoid things, making them better by avoiding things. But you just hit that like, no, you're not going to do that.
Yeah. And one of the things that I learned, we navigated a loss at one point. My daughter was young, and one of the things that we learned as a result of the counseling that we went to for that, again, I'm such a big fan of counseling, but one of the things we learned as a result of the counseling, what we went through of that, is that like when kids are left to create their own narrative around something, it's often much worse than what it would be if you just actually brought it up. But
Yeah,
from that experience, it was so hard for me to talk about. I didn't have the words myself to even say what I was feeling, right? Like it was so hard. And so in some of these instances, it's easier to avoid, not because we necessarily want to, but just because we haven't been able to put words to the depth of feeling, right? And that's
yeah,
so normal. But getting the help you need from whatever avenue you want to really bring words to the experience allows you to show up for your kid in a way that serves them the words that are going to help them. So instead of just kind of having it be this thing in the corner that you feel uncomfortable about and they feel uncomfortable about and nobody's really talking through, having it be something that like support yourself in the ways that you need to, have so much compassion for yourself, and then you bring it up with them, right? Like just giving them space. And sometimes it's coloring, sometimes it's, some of these activities that I share. One of the things I like to do is a worry balloon. So you just blow up a balloon, you have the kid pick the color to represent their worry, you blow up the balloon to how big the worry is. So like, how big is that worry? And then you have them blow it up. And then we say, like, okay, there's three things we can do with the worry. We can hold on to it without tying off that balloon, just like pinch it and walk around wherever you go today. You can ask for help with it, or you can let it go. And kids love letting go of balloons. So it's like kind of a win-win, right? So usually they want to let it go, right? But when we can do that as adults too. Like we're going to carry that worry around with us whether we articulate it or not, right? Like if we try to avoid it, it's still going to be there. And we're trying to balance all the other things while holding on to this worry. And instead, if we can just bring it up, talk it through, a lot of times we can let it go. And then we're not like trying to juggle all these worries while in the midst of, really really full lives, really uncomfortable situations, and giving kids the power to form their own narrative around it and to talk with you in creating that narrative is going to leave them much better off than if everyone's avoiding and they're just left to kind of sort it through on their own.
yeah. Wow. First of all, we've just almost blown through 30 minutes. This is so good. There's so much more I want to talk about. But we can't today, but maybe next time. I do, though, want to kind of end with what I kind of pick up from what you've said today is just the importance of communication, especially in times of change.
Yeah.
I mean, that just seems so important. So before we go, though, I really do want to ask if someone wants to get a hold of you and uh, and set up something to talk to you, how would they go about getting in contact with
Yeah. So on my website, thestressnanny.com, you can fill out a contact form. I also have a questionnaire. A lot of families find the questionnaire super supportive, even if you don't enroll in coaching with me, just to kind of clarify what you're worried about, what you want to see, how you want to move through this season of your life with your child. So you can fill out that questionnaire and I'll get back to you. I'm also on Instagram at The Stress Nanny, and I have a podcast called The Stress Nanny.
you? Oh, I love it. I love it. Well, we have run out of time, Lindsay, and that is unfortunate, but I really appreciate you being here. I mean, giving kids power in anything is great, I think. And but this whole verbalizing their feeling, getting through a divorce, uh, throwing out the myths and the false information, and like you said, getting narratives and perspectives that work not just in the divorce, but it's going to work, you know, going into adulthood, as far as I can see. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks so much for having me, Steve.
Oh, this was wonderful. And everyone, thank you for joining us again today. If anyone has any further questions on today's topic, you can post it here and we can get you connected with Lindsay, or of course, you can connect her with her directly. And until next time, stay safe, stay happy, and be well.